All right, welcome to Hibbert Health. I have three esteemed doctors joining me today. I have Dr. Paul Marik, Dr. Peter McCullough, and Dr. David Scheim. Gentlemen, would you please introduce yourselves and just tell everybody about yourselves and your background? Dr. Marik.
Thank you, Jennifer, for inviting me. So my name is Paul Marik. I went to medical school in South Africa. I then did my residency training in South Africa. At that time, I also did a master's in medicine. I also had the opportunity to go to the South African School of Tropical Medicine. So I have experience in treating tropical medicine. In addition, at that time, I did an advanced degree in pharmacology. I then did a fellowship in London, Ontario, Canada, and then came to the US, where I'm boarded in internal medicine, critical care medicine, neurocritical care, and nutrition science. I have over 500 peer-reviewed publications with over 24,000 citations. I've written over 80 book chapters, 4 critical care books. I'm a serious academic. I'm the second most highly cited and published critical care physician in the world. I take science really seriously, and what we're talking about is based on the most credible science. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you. Thank you. And Dr. McCullough, please introduce yourself.
Thanks, Jennifer. Thanks for having me. And let me state my opinions today will be those of my own and not my institution. And in brief, I'm from Texas originally. I went to Baylor University undergraduate, then University of Texas Southwestern. I did my residency at University of Washington in Seattle. I had 3 years of rural health service before I went to graduate school at the University of Michigan School of Public Health. I was a cardiovascular fellow and chief fellow at William Beaumont Hospital, which is now the Oakland University William Beaumont School of Medicine. And I've had several leadership positions in Southeast Michigan, and now here at Baylor in Texas. I'm the vice chairman of internal medicine at Baylor University Medical Center in Dallas, and I'm the program director in cardiology here, and I lead the Baylor Heart and Vascular Institute Research Institute. My major focus is the interface between heart and kidney disease, and in that area, I'm the most published person in the world in history. I have over 600 publications in the National Library of Medicine. I'm the editor-in-chief of Cardiorenal Medicine and Reviews in Cardiovascular Medicine. And I've chaired more data safety and monitoring boards and looked carefully at drug safety for multiple branches of the National Institutes of Health, as well as for the pharmaceutical industry. So when COVID-19 hit, I really turned my career on a dime, and I focused very intensively on COVID-19 and worked through collaborations in the United States and Italy. I have over 24 publications in COVID-19. I work tirelessly working with experts like Dr. Marik and Dr. Scheim on the call today to learn more about COVID-19, specifically because it has such a high hospitalization and mortality rate. I feel strongly that this is a time where we need the greatest amount of scientific discourse. We need the greatest amount of vetting and global efforts on stemming the tide of this pandemic. So thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And Dr. Scheim, please tell us about yourself.
Well, I received a doctorate in mathematics from MIT. Then I did postdoctoral work at Los Alamos Scientific Lab in mathematical biology. Then I worked 20 years at NIH. And at this point, I'm an independent researcher. And unlike these other gentlemen who have vast credentials, I focused very closely on one particular niche in COVID-19, which is hemagglutination caused by the SARS-CoV-2 virus. I think both Doctors Marik and McCullough have focused on the importance of vascular occlusion and addressing that in treatment. What's very interesting is that the virus itself clumps with red blood cells and other blood cells, and this is very important to consider in the whole mix of microvascular occlusion, which seems to be key to the morbidities of COVID-2, both pulmonary and systemic.
Thank you very much. And gentlemen, would you like to contribute to that discussion?
Yeah, I was going to say, one of the reasons why we had such a tour de force on the introductions, Dr. Hibbert, I think the listeners should know, is that there's been a tremendous wave of therapeutic nihilism against any advancements in home treatment. In the United States, we've had 2 U.S. Senate hearings on November 19th and December 8th now with some of the leading physicians in the field. And we've been called in the New York Times and other media, the United Kingdom Times, we've been called snake oil salesmen and quacks. And I have to tell you, if the 3 doctors on the call are snake oil salesmen and quacks, I think the other people who are detractors, they must be selling Cracker Jacks or something. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. We have the top people in science now facing a wave of therapeutic nihilism of individuals who are manipulating information. They've participated widely in censorship, and the amount of harm and damage that's occurring to not only Americans, but Canadians, citizens of the United Kingdom, some countries in South America, Western Europe, as well as Australia is extraordinary. So I wanted to get that in there.
Yeah, and Jennifer, just to reiterate that myself and my colleagues, the FLCC, actually look after COVID patients at the bedside. We've looked after hundreds of patients at the bedside. We are witnessing the terrible suffering, the carnage, the death, people dying and suffocating to death. So we're not sitting in an ivory tower acting like we know what we're talking about. And unfortunately, many other healthcare authorities have never seen a COVID patient, have never treated a COVID patient. And let me tell you, once you've treated COVID patients, you understand this disease. It is a devastating disease. It is a terrible disease. This is not the flu. It does terrible things to the patient. So I need to emphasize that we are actually at the bedside. We witness this every single day. I spent the weekend with Dr. Verone in Houston, and I saw absolute carnage, people being shipped there from El Paso. These were people who'd been sick for weeks. It's an actual travesty that such a thing should happen in the United States of America. Patients with COVID who were basically told, we have no treatment. We have no treatment. Wait until you get blue and can't breathe, then go to hospital. These people are presenting late. When I mean late, like they've been sick for 4 weeks, struggling to breathe. Once they get to hospital at that time, I'm sorry, the horse is out of the barn. And so our message has to be, you have to intervene early. You have to treat early. You have to prevent this disease. This is not the flu, please. The healthcare consequences are awful. The sooner we get this disease under control, the sooner we can get back to normal. We can go back to school, we can go back to restaurants, but we need to get it under control now. Part of that is sensible healthcare measures, public health measures. We have to wear masks when we're indoors. We have to social distance, and we have to prevent these large gatherings of people. It's completely insane. This is a highly infectious disease.
Let me just add from the perspective of history of science that major breakthroughs are the people who develop them are often subject to initial pushback and persecution. Just let's consider just a few decades ago, the H. pylori, stomach ulcers were being treated by very expensive drugs that were just palliative. And Dr. Barry Marshall in Australia developed a cure, 2 antibiotics and bismuth. And let's see, Dr. Barodi actually helped in that process. It was identified as a bacterial disease. That was the cure. He got the Nobel Prize, but his treatment was marginalized for 10 years after proven in randomized clinical trials. I read about his stuff in complementary medicine journals. We're talking about it. Mainstream medicine shunned him. This is, I'm afraid, par for the course.
David, we kind of recognize that. The problem now is we're facing a catastrophe. I mean, you just have to watch the news. It's heartbreaking. We're having over 2,000 people dying every day, over 200,000 new cases. This is the United States of America. How could this possibly happen? We are facing a crisis. And it seems like the healthcare authorities' attitude is stay at home till you really get sick, go to hospital, and we're waiting for vaccination. You have to be kidding. That is negligence.
Never have we seen therapeutic nihilism like this. I was on national TV last night and I was asked, what does nihilism mean? It's really just a view to offer no treatment, to offer no hope. Can you imagine if we did that for heart disease or cancer? To put this in perspective, in the United States, on average, about 8,600 patients die a day. That's, every year, including last year in 2019. We're now up to 4,000 COVID-19 deaths per day. So that's 4,000 on top of our usual 8,600. I'll give you another perspective. In heart disease, it's about 500,000 patients die per year of heart disease. And we offer everything. We offer stents, defibrillators, heart transplants, everything. We treat acute MI. We get out of bed and open up arteries within 90 minutes as a standard of care. 500,000 in heart disease. And COVID in the United States, we're coming up on 300,000 deaths. And what we do is we hand patients a positive test result who are at high risk, and we tell them to go home with no instructions. The government has completely failed these patients. They are told to go home, wait until they're sick enough, and when they're completely desperate and can't breathe, they go to the hospital. Well, I can tell you, I personally had COVID, and when you get to that level of sickness, there's all kinds of complications. Patients' oxygen levels drop. They can aspirate contents of their mouth into their lungs. They develop complications. Dr. Schein will tell the audience that at that point in time, there's actually dangerous clotting or aggregation of blood cells in the microvessels in the lungs. And this illness is not only due to viral replication, but it's due to abnormal cytokines in the body and then thrombosis or hemagglutination. And it involves a multi-pronged approach. And I think for our authorities, where here we are today in the United States, we have 2 approved therapies from the EUA mechanism. They're both monoclonal antibodies. And for the first antibody product by Lilly, there was only 3 patients difference between the placebo and the active treatment, 3. And for the Regeneron antibody pair, there were only 2 patients difference. So these therapies were basically approved on a wing and a prayer. And what Dr. Marik has done and Dr. Scheim has done is they've shown clear and convincing evidence that with existing therapies used in combination, that there's a far greater weight of evidence than these very expensive monoclonal antibodies, which are not practical or available, that our authorities have approved. In Canada, you have nothing. In Canada, you have no approved therapies. You have nothing under EUA mechanism, and patients there are desperate. We get reports in Canada of human beings taking veterinary products to try to combat COVID-19. The world is off its axis right now. Dr. Marik has written on this. There is some wave of therapeutic nihilism that's resulting in human suffering and death, and the cruelty of it is unimaginable.
One thing that's really interesting that Dr. Kory showed in his Senate testimony is national results. In Peru, ivermectin was distributed en masse in most of the states except for Lima. There was pushback in the capital region, and a very brilliant analyst, which we've helped work on this paper, but he compared the results, and the mortality dropped to about 10% within a month. In the states, you can look at the graphs. It just drops down sharply in those states where ivermectin was distributed, whereas in Lima, it stays flat. So entire nations have seen thousands of people saved with massive distributions of ivermectin. I think the evidence is coming together. I think we're reaching a turning point where ivermectin is a Nobel Prize winning drug. We're understanding how it works. We're seeing dramatic clinical results that happen. People who have breathing dysfunction, within 2 days, it's typical that their breathing is restored. We're seeing a whole bunch of evidence coalesce.
Just to follow up on what David said. So we now have really convincing data across the board. We have pre-treatment prophylaxis. We have post-exposure prophylaxis. We have early treatment. We have late treatment. Interestingly, we have all of this epidemiological data. We have basic science. The data we think is overwhelming and convincing. Unfortunately, there are people who just say there is not sufficient evidence. Now, what kind of evidence do they need? As I said, we have basic science data. We have pre-exposure data. We have post-exposure data. We have early treatment data. We have late treatment data. We have this profound epidemiological data. Many of these studies are randomized controlled trials. We have sufficient data. We need to stop this mindset of doing more studies. We have enough data. People are dying. And I can tell you from personal experience, patients have told me they are desperate. They're desperate. They then get a script of ivermectin. 2 days later, they tell me their life has changed. So we not only have published, peer-reviewed data in waiting, we have patient experience. People have to wake up. You know, we're in the midst of a pandemic. We need to act now. We have sufficient data. My goodness, what do they need? A 40,000 person randomized controlled trial in the midst of a pandemic where you give people placebo and you allow them to die to prove that something works? You have to be kidding. That is immoral. And that goes against the core of the Helsinki Treaty. It goes against the absolute core, which says physicians have the absolute duty to give the best treatment to the patient in front of them. And if placebos compromise their care, you must not give them placebos. It goes against the Helsinki Agreement.
So true.
Well, let me just say that one of the things I've noticed in this whole dialogue, and we're really grateful to Senator Ron Johnson for bringing it to the forefront of the United States, and Parliament member Craig Kelly bringing it to the highest levels in Australia. That's so far the places we're making progress, is that there's an old academic game, and it's called you don't have enough evidence. And we play that game in our meetings when we're trying to discuss a new therapy. So there'll typically somebody who takes the null hypothesis, meaning the current approach is what we're doing is best, and someone takes the alternative hypothesis, saying the new drug or the new approach is better. That's an academic game. People's lives are being lost every day with the worst calamity that the world has seen in modern times. It was mentioned by the minority ranking member Peters yesterday about evidence and that we have to follow the science and follow the evidence. Well, I have to tell you, I'm glad the FDA approved 2 new antibody pairs on the slimmest margin of evidence I've ever seen. If those antibodies are approvable and should be put into use, you know what? Everything that we're talking about, including appropriately indicated and used medically necessary off-label products, including anti-infectives, and there is a grouping of those drugs that have intracellular effects, followed by corticosteroids in patients who have severe pulmonary symptoms or signs of cytokine storm, and then coverage with probably antiplatelet and antithrombotics in higher risk patients. I'm actually more fearful of thrombosis than any manifestations of the syndrome. And like Dr. Marik, I've managed patients, I've lost patients, I've lost family members. And so I feel very strongly that something has to change. We're at an absolute breaking point.
Well, let me just add in terms of the vaccines. People, although this isn't necessary, when you have clinical evidence, you don't need to know how ivermectin works. It could be a mystery as long as however, it is helpful that we have some really good clues about its possible mechanism. And it looks like it really works exactly like the vaccines work. Viral antibodies, the way they work, especially the ones from Pfizer and Moderna, is they bind to viral spike protein. And when they bind it, they block the virus from being able to bind to cellular receptors, either ACE2 for replication or sialic acid. There are many more sialic acid receptors, and this virus will typically attach to a cell through a sialic acid receptor. But in any case, that's what the vaccines do. And Jonas Salk developed the hemagglutination inhibition assay, where you actually show what antibodies do is they block the virus from clumping with red blood cells. This appears to be exactly what ivermectin does. It goes in, 6 molecular modeling study shows it binds to viral spike protein, and it does exactly the same thing, but it does it in 8 hours. You take ivermectin, 8 hours later, it's reached maximal tissue concentration. It's about the safest drug the world has ever seen, given in literally billions of doses. Side effects are minimal. Even at 10 times the normal dose, it's safe. It does pretty much exactly the same thing that vaccines do.
Jennifer, I just want to add a point. So we're not opposing vaccination. I think vaccination is an important step forward, and these new RNA vaccines seem quite remarkable. But we know it's not going to solve their problem right now. It's not going to solve the problem right now. This is a worldwide problem, and we need to act right now. Fortunately, ivermectin is cheap and available around the world. This is a global problem. We can't vaccinate the entire world population in just a few months. It's just not going to happen. And until 60 to 70% of the entire world population being vaccinated, we will not have this disease under control. So we need a bridge. We need a bridge until we get there. So people think we are anti-vaccinators. That's absolutely furthest from the truth. Vaccinations have changed the history of many diseases. You need to look at smallpox. You need to look at polio. It has remarkably changed the history of mankind. But we're now in a pandemic, and our treatments are a supplement, a complement to vaccination. It's not an either or, but we have to act now, because it's going to take too long until we have a sufficient population in the entire world who has been vaccinated received the vaccine.
Yes, very good point. So, gentlemen, thank you very much. This has been very informative and highly charged, as it should be, with the extreme measures that are going on right now around the world. So thank you so much for your time and for sharing everything on every level that you have shared with me and with everybody today. I'm choking up saying this. So thank you very much for being here. And please, to everybody that's listening, subscribe to this channel. I will upload videos on an ongoing basis and try to bring more information to you as soon as I can. And thank you, all of you, and we will stay in touch and keep updating as everything keeps changing on an ongoing basis in a very fast pace. Thank you very much. And I know that everything that you're doing is having a huge impact on mankind. And keep moving forward and stay strong. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you for what you do.
Thank you.